Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the glistening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea.
We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. These are the powerful words of Amanda Gorman's inauguration poem. Hello, everyone. My name is Soribel Henao, and I am so excited and proud to welcome you to our 2021 Black History Celebration. As one of the inaugural Diversity Fellows, Professor of Educational Leadership, and member of the Black and Latinx Faculty and Staff Association, we welcome you. Without each and every member, this would not be possible. Thank you, BLFSA. I am thrilled to be part of such an important endeavor at Queens College. Our theme, Sankofa, reminds us that in order to understand our present and ensure our future, we must know our past. Today, we welcome you to learn, be a part of our history beyond February. We look forward to an amazing program. Thank you. Does that sound familiar, Fiona?
One of my favorite songs in life. I'll never get tired of that song because it speaks so many things. So yeah, of course, it's very familiar.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Resistance and Rebellion, the importance of decolonizing our history. We have a super special treat today. Fiona Compton is a London-based St. Lucian photographer, artivist, filmmaker, and historian. After graduating from London College of Printing in 2005 with a BA in photography, Fiona has been working as a professional photographer with the UK's largest publishing houses, traveling between the UK and Europe to photograph some of the most influential figures in the world of finance and banking. Over the past 13 years, her work has explored the various disparities in representations of the Afro-Caribbean diaspora within art and mainstream media. In 2017, she launched her multidisciplinary project, The Revolution of the Fairy Tale, which celebrates lesser-known heroes from Black history under the nostalgic platform of well-known fairy tales. Her films have been screened across the globe, winning several awards, including Best Documentary and Best Director for Caribbean Film and Fashion Awards, and have also been featured in the UK's Cabinet Office. Fiona continues her mission to educate in innovative ways through events, through her account Know Your Caribbean via Instagram, which facilitates educational posts on short, palatable bursts. Fiona also has run creative workshops for children and young people teaching the history of the culture of the Caribbean and its linkages to Africa in venues such as South Bank Center and Black Cultural Archives in London. Her clients have included HSBC, Amazon, Sony Music, Cosmopolitan Magazine, to name a few. Fiona remains a strong advocate for her history and culture and is the official ambassador for London's Notting Hill Carnival, the second largest street festival carnival in the world. Without further ado, I present to you Fiona.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited to get into our discussion about resistance and rebellion, and just speaking about the journey of kind of like connecting to our histories. So, welcome everyone. We're going to be talking about decolonizing our histories. And in order for me to kind of speak more on that, I have to tell you about my own journey through discovery of my own history. So, I am from St. Lucia, born and bred, but I moved to the UK when I was 18. And I think it's coming out of my environment caused me to appreciate where I'm from, because I went to a place that was completely opposite to what I know of myself. So within that, I studied photography. I'm going to show you guys some of my work in a moment, and my work kind of reflects my frustrations when I was doing my degree in photography, because I saw very little representation in one of the most respected arts institutions in the UK or Europe or globally, because the university that I went to has a really amazing reputation for um, representing the highest standard of the arts. And I kind of fell flat with disappointment, seeing very little representation of myself and my culture during my degree project. So can you get the next slide, please? The next one. So within how I grew up in when I grew up in Saint Lucia, I had two very patriotic parents. My father was a farmer, so he had a lot of love of the soil, but he also was a politician, so he had a love of the people. So having that combination, and it's only through reaching adulthood that I start to understand the importance of having patriotic parents. And my mom is very, very much a kind of a mini historian, even though she wouldn't call herself that. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to share with you guys some images of my home growing up, and it come to make you understand how Know Your Caribbean came into existence via my parents' influence and how important that was. But just in terms of looking at some of my work, this is an example of one of my pieces of work where I did after graduating with my own frustrations, because you're looking at all these different artists, upheld in all of these galleries, and I just never saw any kind of versions of myself in these institutions. So I decided I was going to make my own thing. So I started to recreate famous pieces of art, from Mona Lisa to Klimt's The Kiss, um, um, Breakfast at Tiffany's, and just incorporating parts of my culture. So you can see within a piece like this, you see there's the madras fabric. But I wanted to also see persons like me in love and doing nice things. I felt like those spaces were not inclusive on screen or in galleries for Black and brown people. And I wanted to kind of create images that were deserving of being upheld in those galleries as well. So could I have the next slide, please? Right. So this piece is the Go to Seashell earring, and it is my own version of Jonas Vermeer's The Girl with the Seashell Earring, which is one of the most iconic pieces of art. Even people who are not art aficionados are familiar with this image, seeing it all over. So I made this piece in like 2011, and it basically tells the journey of our history through madras fabric. So madras fabric, which you can see, is a kind of checkered tartan style fabric, which you'll find a lot in the French Caribbean, so in St. Lucia, Dominica, Martinique, Guadeloupe. Also in Jamaica, Nevis and Kitts, as well, as part of the national costumes. And it's quite a valued fabric, and it's very much part of Caribbean identity. But it has its roots, the roots of this fabric basically show our history. So it comes from India, developed by Scottish traders, then Scottish manufacturers, then brought across by Portuguese traders to West Africa. It was used as a means of bartering, and then brought across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. So it really shows the journey of our history. And I incorporated the seashell because obviously, so many of our ancestors came across the Caribbean via the ocean. So the ocean very much is telling an integral part of our story. And I just wanted to create something beautiful of a Black woman in our fabric, but also telling this journey of migration in our stories, and everything in one piece of fabric that is still valued. And also the fact that Black women were not allowed to have their hair outside with the tenure law, and to see that how we found beautiful ways of wrapping our hair and finding ways to make ourselves look beautiful, even though we were told that our hair was not. So this is one of the examples of how I wanted to have ourselves seen in beautiful pieces of art. And I think before the whole term decolonizing started trending, I think that's what I was doing before I even knew I was doing it. Because I think decolonizing is just wanting to see yourself in these institutions. That's simply how I feel that it is. So
Fiona, thank you for that. I actually, so as you're talking about this beautiful painting, where is the girl today, and how is she living beyond your creation?
Where is the girl today? So in the literal sense, the girl today, she is actually she is a singer musician, and she performs in the West End. So that's the UK version of Broadway, and she has the most amazing voice. But aside from that, where is the girl today? Who she represents? I'm still I've unearthed. I feel like I've unearthed part of her story, but I think with history, the more I look into her and this person and what she represents, I haven't unearthed all of her yet. I've only uncovered pieces and segments and fragments, and I feel like through my daily journey of going through history and so on, I'm just putting together all the micro fragments to really get her story together. So I guess you could say I'm still looking for her.
Thank you. And I meant to ask you, based on your parents' impact on you, how important has it been for you to continue telling the versions of the Caribbean stories to be learned through these artifacts that you continue to bring forth?
Absolutely. If we could go to the next slide, I'd like to illustrate kind of how things started, especially with Know Your Caribbean, and I guess how I channeled my frustrations into creating something. So when we get to the next slide, it's basically my mother's collection, right? So my mother, how that started is that my mother loves collecting old things and so on. So if you go to the next slide, I'll give you an example of what this is like in my house in St. Lucia, in my mom's house in St. Lucia. And on the walls, there are lots of old maps and old photographs and etchings and stuff of the Caribbean. And I think, obviously, as a child, you don't really pay attention to these things, but I think subconsciously I was absorbing them. And then as I got older, I started to become more curious. So if you could go to the next slide, and I can show you guys an example. So as we can see in our house, there's a beautiful painting by Agostino Brunias, and of these beautiful Creole women. And then alongside that, in the token that's in my hand, is from a coaling station token. So where women used to carry like huge baskets of coals. And when you look at the photographs, they're wearing all white, long, starched skirts, white cotton, and like you're working with coal. How do you maintain that, that level of regality in working with coals, And I just thought that's so beautiful, these things to keep, and those are the things that I started to become more and more curious with. So if you could go to the next slide. So, for example, when I saw photographs like the woman in the middle, and she's wearing a wobdouillet. So wobdouillet is the national costume that you find a lot in the French Caribbean. And I just think she looks so regal. I think she like, if you look at her neck, it's covered by all of these gold chains, almost like Mr. T kind of style, and she's wearing, and even her pose, is very confident. Her tete mawe, which is what we call it for the head tie, and has so many different significances as well. And just the whole pose. And so I wanted to know, who is this woman? When was this taken? Where was this taken? What is the context? And those are the kind of things that I started to see. So my mom started to develop tried to find out that you could actually find some of these amazing postcards on eBay. So she kept saying, Fiona, could you go and bid on this card? It's like it's closing this card from like 1901 Haiti of these musicians. You need to bid on it now. And so I started to become fascinated as well because of the urgency through the bidding on eBay. So if you could go to the next slide, I could show you guys some other examples. So, you know, growing up, when you look at history, I did history in secondary school, like most people, and you have these overviews, but it never really felt personal, so I never connected to history. So I dropped history in secondary school. And I think the reason why I never connected with history is because we did not speak about the personal stories of people. It was always, oh, in 1774, the British came and they did this, but never speaking about people. So, for example, within this, I'm looking at these people. If you look at, you know, the women in cutting the sugar cane and what they're wearing, the attitudes on their faces, the indentured laborers here on your left, seeing like how they're posing, how they're sitting, like what they're wearing. And I just wanted to keep looking closer and closer in. So if we could go into the next slide, please. So, you know, looking at and also reading some of the writings on the postcards, and, you know, looking at, you know, when you see the gentleman who's sitting down in front of the hut, and the title of that postcard is called Uncle Tom's Cabin. You know, who named it? Obviously, there's the famous novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. Are they referencing him? Who is he? You know, and thinking about also that a photograph like that would have been taken in the early 1900s. So this means that, you know, perhaps his parents were enslaved people. So that this is someone that we're looking at now in a photograph in my hand, who would have had first-hand information about, you know, what slavery was like in the Caribbean. So I'm thinking this is absolutely incredible. You know, I want to zoom in and look into their eyes. I want to look at the details of their feet and kind of bring the humanity back into the history. So if we look into the next slide, please. You know, for example, just kind of literally zooming in, you know, is this postcard here is looking at the focus is on the hut and all the people that fit inside this quote unquote native hut. But I want to know about the people inside there. If you can go into the next slide as well. So I want to know who that man is. And I think that is how Know Your Caribbean developed, because in terms of me being in the UK, having that frustration of my university being a disappointment diversity wise, in terms of representations and discussions, which I know is something that is across so many educational institutions, but then also the frustration of not having the Caribbean narrative told properly. It's either it's very Jamaican centric, and not looking at, for example, I will listen to Zouk music, or that St. Lucians love country and Western music randomly. That is a random piece of history to just show just how dynamic we are. You know, looking at the Chinese Cubans, or looking at how we have different genres of music. So I developed Know Your Caribbean in order to kind of show just the diversity of how we are as Caribbean people. So for example, in Know Your Caribbean, I asked people to give me a different genre of music of from your Caribbean country. And I think we got over 200 genres of music. You know, most people think we're just soca, dancehall, or maybe salsa and things like that. But to have 200 genres of music, and that's just from the people who contribute on Instagram, it just shows how diverse and dynamic we are. So, you know, I think, for example, this slide here, to me, on the left-hand side, the map is kind of colonial, focusing on the maps and all this kind of thing. And I want to know about the people. So me, Know Your Caribbean is knowing about the people in the photograph. So that's basically why I felt the need to develop Know Your Caribbean, to show just how diverse our identity is. So if we're looking at this next slide here, sorry, that's my son in the back. So okay, if we look at this slide here, this is an example of a story that happened in Antigua. And in the beginning, when I started to do my history and sharing the histories on Know Your Caribbean, I shared the image on the right, and the two images here kind of tell the same story about the same person. So it is basically about a plot to overthrow slave masters in Antigua. Okay, so basically this guy called Prince Class, he comes from Ghana. They say he's from nobility or whatever, and that he's they're having this governor's ball. So all the Europeans on the island were coming to this one place for this ball. So they're like, yo, we're gonna blow up this ballroom, and then we're just gonna take over and have our freedom, right? But the plot was foiled, and they executed Prince Class, breaking him on the wheel, which is one of the most horrific forms of punishment within the slavery era. But so I shared that image, and I'm like, oh my God, this is horrible. Look at all these horrible things, these white people did, and all these things like that. And many years later, digging deeper and deeper into my research, because if you just type in Prince Class Antigua, you will find that story that I just told you, okay? And they'll focus on the horrific things that they did to him. But I had to dig really, really, really deep and find something from a random Pennsylvania Gazette. And it told a story, if you go into the next slide, and it just has the explanations of what Prince Class, or his Ghanaian name is Akwamu, did. He did like this war dance in front of the plantation, in front of all the Europeans, and he declared war. And I thought that was one of the most beautiful things. The thought that he had the umbrella, and they took a blood oath, and that they had regal fabrics and all these kind of things, and that he was asserting himself and declaring what he was about to do. I think that part of the story is more important for me in terms of learning the history. So I reshared telling that different side of Prince Class or Kwamu's story. And I think these are the stories I need to know more about. We all need to know about, because I think obviously slavery defines us so much, and it's about finding the alternative side, the side that that the man was dancing and doing this big war dance in front of everyone and declaring himself. I think that's something that's really beautiful and really important part of why I do Northern Caribbean. So within this here is I want to talk about the Negmawa. Obviously, Soribel, you are half Haitian. So could you tell me, for you, okay, right, as someone of Haitian heritage, the term Negmawa, right? What does it mean to you? What does it represent within Haitian culture?
It's the black maroon, or the maroon, the black man. And when we see this on site, it is our sense of liberation being displayed through art, our form of, there is no freedom, because we always knew that without being broken, we would always be liberated. So there's always been freedom. I'm sorry. There's always been freedom because we were never broken.
Right. So obviously, like when for those who may not be familiar, so the image of so these are two statues. One is in Haiti and one is in Dominica, and they're both of the Negmawa. And they're blowing the conch shell, which is the conch shell was a means of communication, a means of declaring war, a means of all. It meant so many things. They would have secret codes in terms of. So the conch shell in itself is a symbol of empowerment, right? But what's funny is that the term Negmawa in St. Lucia, where I'm from, is actually a derogatory term. And it's used. So if you can see, there's a quote that says, poltroons who were too lazy to work for their masters. So I found this quote from John Stedman's expedition to Suriname in the 1700s, when they were fighting the Maroons in Suriname, right? And there was this, he documented basically, it was like an infraction. So it's the black militia who were contracted to catch the Maroons in Suriname, met up with the Maroons in Suriname in the forest in there, right? And they were arguing. And then it's like the black militia said to the Maroons, "You are poltroons." I was like, "What's a poltroon?" I Googled it. It's like, it means a coward. So it's saying that you are a coward who's too lazy to work for your master. And this what Negmawa is associated negatively in that way in St. Lucia. So when I was having a discussion with some people on Facebook, and someone said that Negmawa means you're uncultured, you're lazy, you're uneducated, and I'm like, wait, but no, no, it doesn't mean that at all. I mean, but it just goes to show that how that even something like Negmawa, so something that's in Haiti, that is like the ultimate symbol of empowerment, and in Dominican as well. But even the term Negmawa can be colonized and be used as a term to describe someone who's lazy because you don't want to work on the plantations for your master and so on. So, I think these kind of things are really important to discuss. And also, like, speaking of Haiti, I grew up in St. Lucia, like I said, I did my histories and stuff like that, but I didn't understand the importance of the Haitian Revolution until the earthquake in 2010. So I was a big woman. So I was finding out all the details of the Haitian Revolution, and the Haitian Revolution inspired my project, The Revolution, the Fairy Tale, because I felt like, how could I not know this? I felt so cheated. And, in terms of, one of the things I like to find is find old videos and listen to how they talk. So that I found an old video cover. You can YouTube it. Anyone who's interested, if you put like Haiti Voodoo 1920, so 100-year-old video, and how they speak about Haiti, that people are eating babies and all kinds of ridiculous propaganda. And it's 100 years old. But the thing is, people still believe that today, even with the access to so much knowledge and so on. The relationship that we have with Obia, the relationship that we have with voodoo and all of that, when we don't know anything. When I ask people, why are you afraid of Obia? Because it's bad. Could you tell me why it's bad? Could you explain to me the processes? But that just goes to show, even anything that linked us to our African identity was demonized as satanic and so on. So in terms of, it just goes to show, like, even within the Caribbean, we do exercise colonized mindsets. It's not just something you find in the UK or in the USA and so on, because our relationship, the Caribbean's relationship with Haiti, is a prime example, because for the most part, it's like, people would just say Haiti is very poor, or it's dirty, or it's demonic. I remember listening to a Jamaican radio station when the earthquake happened, and people were calling and saying, "Oh, it's because you practice voodoo, that's why it happened." And it was very painful to hear, because most of us don't even know how to practice, don't know the first thing about voodoo, right? And I just feel like this is a lack of communication, a lack of understanding, but also colonialism that's making us be afraid of looking into the very things that empower us. So I don't know if you'd like to go to the next slide, please.
Well, before we move on, I did have I was just so excited by everything that you were saying about the Negmawa, because for us, I didn't want to go into the derogatory piece, but it is, something that we do have to acknowledge, to think about also, how do we go beyond thinking about Negmawa in the Black Lives Matter movement? How is it relative? And then also in connection to Haiti, we just had our very first event presentation last week, where we covered the Haitian Revolution, right, and the importance, right, of Haiti's impact on the Caribbean beyond and despite the historical stereotypes. So I wonder how, in bringing the Negmawa and thinking about Haiti in London, how are you all actually embedding these conversations in your cultures?
Well, I would say in London, most people don't know much about Haiti. I have one Haitian friend out there, and he had a Haitian cafe. It was Cafe 1788. But he's closed it to go on to sell like Haitian coffee elsewhere. So there's not much of a Haitian presence. And even when I was looking for like specific Caribbean-based courses that would speak about like the Haitian Revolution, its impact, I found very few of them. And in the UK, yeah, the Haiti's impact is something that is not known much at all, and it's Caribbean history as well. It's not Black history is is a struggle in the UK. It is a huge struggle. But in terms of like with the Black Lives Matter movement, I think all of those stories are integral, because I think that the frustration that a lot of people have when you're learning basic history, be it African American history or Caribbean history, is always the story. Oh, the Europeans came, yes, they enslaved Africans, yes, and then they let them go, and then that was it, the end. And it's all, and then they did a lot of horrific things to us, and then we did nothing, and they let us go. Yay, all right. And it's, but not understanding, like, the hell that they were given, so much, like every single day they were like, they had to go through so much extremes, because the Negmawa, if you look at the Maroons, which are Negmawa in Suriname, they were 20,000 strong. And to hear those kind of stories, I it's like a child. For me, it's like a kid walking into a candy store, because it's all new and fresh, and like, wow, I didn't know this. But in a strange way, when I read it, it's like almost like I'm remembering it. I don't know if you I know you know that. So it's sometimes you read something and you totally it resonates with you in a different way. And I think especially the story of the Negmawa is just the empowerment that we need. I think everyone is tired of not another slave movie, because we're only telling that one side. And it's extremely frustrating. So I think it's, of course, like the Negmawa and PLM are very much, the same thing.
No, indeed, indeed. And I wonder also, you being in St. Lucia, we're thinking of these, we think about the Negmawa we have in IT. What monumental fixture would you say is pristine to the Lucian, to the ideal Lucian? If we were to go, who would we actually be looking for monumentally?
Oh, I mean, the thing is, we have a lot of good heroes, but not many monuments for them. They're obscure. I mean, there's a statue of my father, because my father was prime minister. So, I mean, that's wonderful. But in terms of, looking at, oh, so look, my brothers told me they put in a new statue of a Negmawa. When did they put that up? Last year. Okay, this is new news to me, so this is very encouraging. But I mean, it took long. It took long, but it's because Sufre was a very integral area of where they had the Negmawa fighting. But we have loads of freedom fighters that most of us don't know the names of, and I think that's the thing that frustrates me the most, because it's like, if people say name a St. Lucian hero, they would say people of recent times, but especially during the era of colonialism and slavery, no St. Lucian really can name a hero. Like, like in Haiti, there's Toussaint and there's Dessalines, and there's Bookman and there's Macanda and there's Cecile and all of that. And that's the goal for me, is for, like, not just in St. Lucia but across the Caribbean, for everyone to name these people, like, just like that, off the bat, no problem. But yeah, I think it's just within St. Lucia. I'm so pleased to hear. I'm like, wow, how come I didn't know that? But the Negmawa in Soufrière. But I just want to kind of really, for the term not to be an insult anymore. That's what I'm really trying to work on.
Excellent. So we are during a very special time in Caribbean culture. The Mecca of carnivals should have been happening right now in Trinidad and Tobago. Today is officially Carnival Tuesday, and due to the global pandemic, we cannot jump and mask the way that we would love to. But considering this beautiful history that has been told here, how do we add that joyous part of our celebrations, our history? Where do we bring in Carnival?
Well, I mean, the thing is, for those who haven't grown up in Carnival culture, so for example, when you can see here, this slide here, the Code Noir, so music, dance, and gatherings were all banned underneath the Code Noir, and even within British colonies and so on, they had their own slave codes and stuff like that. So I mean, there's even the threats of death for you to be singing and dancing. And the mere fact that things like Carnival exist is pretty much, you know, a sheer miracle. If you could go to the next slide, please. You know, I mean, like when I started to do just more and more research, I love to find the different intricacies of how they try to stop. And the reason why I like to find those stories is because it's very encouraging to see that they still exist. So if you see on the left side, it says the Tobago Slave Act, that it was not the enslaved who were punished. Well, they were punished, but also the slave owners, they were charged just over $1,000 in today's money if they allowed their enslaved to sing or dance or blow the conch shell and beat the drum. And I mean, when you look at it, things in Tobago's culture, and they have so many different kinds of drumming, and I'm like, it still existed anyway. So the fact that it existed is, you know, a beautiful act of resistance, you know. If you could go to the next slide as well, please. So, you know, I just love to find, this is from Suriname from the 1830s. And I mean, like, as if the guy in the middle is almost doing like the fortnight dance. I don't know what he's doing, but it looks like the most amazing festival of dance. And like I said, I love to zoom in and look at the different faces of the people and see that enjoyment. And the fact, knowing that you were threatened with so much violence if you were doing it, and you're still doing it full heartedly. And I think that's why Carnival is something that, to me, Carnival is our means of protest. Carnival is like the Caribbean way of Black Lives Matter. If we could go to the next slide as well, please. Like, it's, you know, there was celebrations. There's so much when you look at Caribbean culture. These are the French settlers. This is in Jamaica, and the next, the one on the right is in Dominica. So regardless, no matter which Caribbean country you went to, we found a way to express ourselves. And I think despite all the threats with things like the Code Noir, you know, joy still did survive. If we could go to the next slide as well. And I think that's why Carnival is like the greatest act of resistance. The fact that they went through so many measures of um, going into, like, you know, the quarters of the enslaved and burning their instruments, threatening them, you know, with some of the most awful punishments. And we still managed to derive beautiful things. And then when you look at things like Carnival in Guadeloupe, it's not everybody whining and they broke it out, right? But they're marching. And within in Guadeloupe, they don't have, like, you know, like for those who go to Labor Day and stuff, you see like the sound systems on trucks and things that Guadeloupe doesn't really have that. They have um, everyone, you are given like a piece of paper and they tell you how to make your costume out of natural fabrics and paints and so on, right? And then everyone walks together and people are playing drums, they're blowing conch shells. They're even doing things like they have the whip masters where they're cracking the whips. To show it is to show respect to, you know, the history of slavery and enslavement, in fact. And everyone is singing together and marching together. It's one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see. Just like YouTube Guadeloupe Carnival, and you're like, it is one of the most authentic versions of Carnival to me. I know that in Haiti as well, Jacmel Carnival looks so beautiful. Like, sorry, but one day you need to take me because I every
It
time
is. It is.
I had a friend who went and she said, Fiona, if you go to Haiti, you never come back. So, and I believe her. But you know that I think Carnival is something really important, and for those who've never grown up in that environment or in that community, because the thing is, Carnival is not a 2 day thing. It's a year-round thing. It's something that people are already planning in advance, from the parties or what we call fetes, from the costumes to the different events, you know, to the things like calypso tents, which is social and political commentary. If you listen to calypso music, I think for those who on the outside associate calypso music with like peng peng happy music, but it's actually really political, and it's a lot of speaking out about social issues as well. So even in that sense as well, it is a form. it is a form of Black Lives Matter because it is it's speaking out against social injustices. So that is how we do it in the Caribbean. It's like a lot of the things that people associate with like frivolity and just happy times. It stems from protest. It stems from speaking out against certain types of oppression, and I think that's why Carnival is like so important. I think it's the most beautiful form of protest that you could participate in.
Can you, as the ambassador of the Notting Hill Carnival in London, can you share with us your involvement with that, and even provide a little bit of history of how does the carnival in London stand out?
Right. So basically, Carnival in London is almost a replica of how Carnival started in the Caribbean. It is, it was basically like a protest. So what was happening in the 1950s in West London, which is now a very affluent part of London, as with most places, it became gentrified and is now, virtually unaffordable to the average person. But at the time, it was where they had a massive influx of Caribbean immigrants, um, and immigrants from other places, but mostly Caribbean people. And there was a lot of racial tension. So within that, there were groups of white nationalists, for example, the Teddy Boys, who went N-word hunting. They went on N-word hunts across London just to wreak havoc. And an Antiguan man did lose his life in the process. And this upheaval of racial tension led to Claudia Jones, who's a Trinidadian activist, and she's a great person to look up as well because she's did so much amazing stuff at such a young age. But she was the first person to put together a version of Carnival as a response to kind of bring some more community and some, community unity and like social discussion, social commentary in London. And then it developed after that because she did it, Claudia did it wintertime in like December in a hall. And then over time, Ron Laslet brought it to the streets. But it was all in the intention of as a response to the racial riots and abuses that were happening in London. So it's still like the same. This is the reason or the root of it all is still a form of protest, and but also doing it in our own way. When you look at things like steel pan, a lot of people, like I say, a lot of things that people associate with our culture that are frivolous and even cheesy, like steel pan. I didn't know, but like steel pan was developed because the African drum was banned. Up until the 1930s. The late 1930s in Trinidad, the African drum was banned. The church god was heavily involved in removing African identity or the attempts to remove African identity in Trinidad. So what did Trinis do? They started playing with bamboo, right? They call it the taboo, bamboo. Then they banned the bamboo. They said, oh no, listen, it's too much, right? So then like, the World War II came, everyone is displaced and so on. And then they're like, oh, maybe we could take oil drums and try and make a little rhythm with that. And then they developed it into this huge thing where you now find steel pan orchestras of like over 100 people. There are 11 different kinds of steel pan. There's some steel pans that have 56 notes on it. And that artistry was developed as a response once again to the European attempts at the removal of African identity. So the more people know things about that, like steel pan, you're gonna hear steel pan in a different way. You're not really gonna think it's cheesy music anymore. So I think that's why I'd love for people to connect more to Carnival. So my role as an ambassador is to do things like this, is to talk and to yes, Carnival is a Black celebration. Noka has commented. It really is. I just want to encourage people to kind of know the context of it, because once you know the context of it, it's not for me to be preachy to you and say, oh, it comes from, we're trying to revolutionize ourselves, post emancipation, all that kind of thing. But it's for you to understand the beauty of it, and how the fact that so many things that we have survived despite so many attempts to remove it over and over and over. And I think once you know the context of it, you just appreciate it more. You'll enjoy it more. You will whine more. You will sing the songs louder. You will look at steel pan orchestras differently and have that appreciation. So I think that's, for me as a carnival ambassador, it's about that, and it's also for people to appreciate the freedom that comes with carnival as well. I think there's no freer feeling like being in the middle of the road covered in paint, powder, oil. I think a lot of, I think within social media, I find a lot of the photographers focus, and for those who've never come to Carnival, Carnival is not just pretty costumes and headpieces and feathers. That's one aspect of Carnival, and it's a necessary aspect of Carnival. But we also have the alternatives, which is what we call the dirty mask, which is like the precursor to looking all beautiful and glamorous, and that is, for me, is my favorite part of Carnival, because no one is, you don't feel self-conscious. Dr. Onika Henry of Trinidad had a client, and because Dr. Henry is a sexologist, and she said that one of her clients who was sexually abused, who always felt that she was under, um, just under the gaze of men, never felt freer. She found her freedom in Carnival, right? So people normally think you see girls whining and doing this kind of thing is very sexualized, but that person found her freedom, especially in Dirty Mask, because you have that kind of anonymity. Everyone is the same. You're all covered in the paint and the powder and the oil and the dirtiness. It's not about how you look. It's more about how you feel. And that freedom, I would love for people to access as well, so that you're not, it's because Carnival is supposed to be about you expressing yourself, not you being self-conscious about if your beads, and of course you want to look good, but that is only one part of it. You want to feel good, and that's, I think, the number one thing I want to push for people who are involved in Carnival.
Yes, I think when we think of dirty mass, we also call it Juve.
Yes.
Yes, so it is our pregame to the real day. And it is, as Fiona is saying, one of the more fascinating experiences up to the day. Now, and as I hear you speak about bringing up the ambassador involvement, I can't help but think about how can the presence of Carnival be tied in a very culturally responsive way from a teaching and learning experience?
In a teaching and learning experience, I think it's about people getting like hands-on. Like, for example, in the UK, so in London, there's a lot of people saying, "Oh, the youths are coming, the young people are coming to make trouble," and there's a lot of violence and all this kind of thing like that. But I'm thinking, it's kind of hands-on. They say a lot of women are disrespected, or their costumes are skimpy, and it gives people rights to violate, and we have all of these very negative things surrounding Carnival. But I just think it's more like a hands-on approach. Yes, I can talk to you about, oh yes, this thing happened and they banned African drum. Oh, that's all good and well, but to have young people actually making costumes, tapping into, like, the dying art of wire bending, and the whole kind of the community aspect of a mass camp, because that in itself is dying. A lot of costumes are now starting to be made in China and stuff like that, but before, it was a community thing where everyone would come and it'd be in this kind of warehouse space or somebody's house. It depends. And everyone is sitting and making costumes well into the night, and people are playing music, they're talking, and you have a much greater appreciation for the costumes and the entire process. I cannot expect anyone who hasn't really put their hands in it to have a full understanding of the value of it, and just how long and the love and care has put into the costume making, or even just not just the costumes, but just the organization of everything. I would encourage people to, even if you don't want to play pan, maybe go to one of the pan yards and look at the people rehearsing. The different pan orchestras rehearsing, and seeing the time and love that's being put into it. It's not. I think that is how to kind of really encourage people to kind of learn and understand. It's kind of taking that proper hands-on approach.
In as I hear you speaking on that, and I think we can't help but just connect with what we're all experiencing through ourselves right now. While this celebration would have been going on, we're also dealing with many other things globally. And how do we transition from knowing that this is part of our history, this is part of our story, while we have these very layered, institutionalized systems within us, we also have to deal with the reality of dealing with trauma. How would you, and I know that the segue in itself is one of those, like, we have to have the good with the bad kind of, but can you tell us more about what this is for us when we think about reconnecting with ourselves? So I just, as we now see, noticed that Fiona will probably get back to us, but please bear with us as she comes in. But this is an important topic considering that Fiona was about to close out in a very empathetic, sympathetic way with everything that we've been experiencing over the last year. And it ties everything in with understanding not just that we are dealing in a time that perhaps we obviously seem to be unprecedented, but there are so many parts of us that continue to need the celebration, continue to be recognized, continue to be comforted and nurtured. And I think at this time, without understanding how we can come together, not just as a nation, but here we are having Fiona come in, London-based. She's in St. Lucia right now, but also able to tell us that although we are continents apart, we're still dealing with the same issues. And at some point, we are going to have to come back to understanding that this has been beyond us, right? This is something that can only be initially spoken about, but not necessarily found a solution with. And we haven't been able to get there. So I'm hoping that she can come back and join us sooner than later. But any questions that you may have for us at the moment, that would be great. I don't want to fill in her presentation because she had so much to say. All right. Any word from her, anybody? Here she comes.
I'm back. I'm so sorry. Caribbean internet, but it's fine. So sorry about that.
So we were just about to speak about the trauma, and I was explaining that in spite of our continents being so far apart, there's so many of our similarities that we're all still living, that although as a layered people, we have the good that we're dealing with and we can celebrate, but we're also dealing with some not so good things. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I think the thing with me and history is that I've become quite obsessed with it. It's, like I said, it's like trying to find the pieces of the puzzle of the girl with the seashell earring, right? And I find it's the issue. And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I was looking for the history of planting, right? Because I was doing a workshop about it, and then you're reading about planting and stuff, and then I just came across it, like from one paragraph to the next is cool, and then it's like the most horrific thing. So like the history is booby trap. That's what he says. Like it's booby trap for you, Fiona. You don't know what's going to happen, or it's like walking through a minefield. You don't know what to expect. And so I think in order to, it's really hard to go into our history, to be honest, to go into our history and not dig up some kind of trauma. There are going to be things that are going to affect you, and you just have to prepare yourself, but also give yourself breaks. I've learned to have to give myself breaks, because sometimes like I'll be really fascinated with the topic, and then I'll hit something, and it will make me feel really, my energy will be really low. I'll be really depressed for like sometimes a few days. And how to deal with it, I think it is pacing yourself, and to be gentle on yourself. I think that's something in our community we don't do. We're not gentle on ourselves. We always want to be like we big and bad, and we don't have our vulnerabilities. And I think it's necessary for us to kind of recognize if we feel like something is affecting us, and to try to do certain types of self-care to manage that, because I too am learning how to navigate. I don't have the set answer at all, in dealing with things like that. Because for example, I was trying to find, a lot of the times I try to find empowering stories to share in the Caribbean, like I was saying. And there was a period where I was looking at, there was a period in Martinique, um, where they had lots of poisonings. Like the enslaved were just going wild, like poisoning everybody. Like they were really like on this thing. But, you know, and I was like, wow, this is so amazing. Like how they were using their knowledge of herbs and plants and stuff to liberate themselves. But then when you find out when it doesn't work, and the repercussions when it doesn't work, or someone snitches on them, and then it brings you right back down again. So, in terms of managing it, like one of the things I wanted to share, which I've shared on the Caribbean, is that I collated basically a bunch of things that was describing um, Africans dancing across the Caribbean. So like from Martinique to Barbados, Jamaica, Haiti, a whole bunch. And the wording was, oh, these heathens do this, or they do this lascivious that, and oh, this indecent that. And but I love reading things like that, because what I'm seeing is, what you're saying is indecent. It's probably somebody maybe whining or doing some really beautiful dance, but that was their perspective. They saw it as indecent. But I'm like, you know what? Hey, that sounds really amazing. Like you're saying, oh, I remember there was a thing about John Canoe in Jamaica. So John Canoe is a festival that happens in Jamaica. And it was this priest, and he was complaining. He's like, oh, the slaves are beating the drums well into the night, doing their demonic practices and moving their bodies and contorting their bodies. And I'm like, oh, so, to see that it was, but I love reading things like that, because that means that, despite that, you find those little derivatives of joy, but you have to learn how to also read between the lines of like these colonial writings. So it's like there's no set answer. I think it's sometimes you just have to kind of mentally prepare yourself and know when to take a break. If you go getting into this history thing and wanting to know it, our history is very traumatic, and that's what it is. But there is so much to unearth, and there is so much joy to find as well. Like things like understanding the history of Carnival, or the history of steel pan, or like there's this dance in Curacao called a taboo, and it was banned until like, it had all these restrictions up until 2012. It was banned from like 1656 until 2012. The mere fact that a dance like that survived, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It's up to you if you want to focus on the fact that they banned it and all the horrible things that they did in order to repress it, or you can focus on the fact that it still exists today. It's still there despite all these efforts. So I think it's you have to kind of sometimes shift your perspective.
Got it. And as we're closing out, I can't help but direct this question to us as an institution, and an educational institution at that. But from your perspective, your learnings, your career as an artivist, and it's something that we so admire because we think that advocacy and activism is usually protesting or boycotting or just going against the grain. But here you are exposing these beautiful ways to expose and explore activism. And I just can't help but ask, what can Queens College and other educational institutions do to become more globally aware and connected to this type of history during pandemic and beyond?
Well, I mean, this pandemic is really is just a vibe killer, isn't it? Because like one of the first things I would have said is for to encourage like partnerships with like as I know New York has like a very strong Caribbean community, um, and that and within the Caribbean community there are the Jamaicans, there are the Dominicans, there are the Haitians, and then within that they're also different from each other. We're not a monolith, right? So it's in future when the pandemic lifts, obviously to start working with some of these groups and like doing the hands-on thing, go and do a workshop about mask making, or like to encourage people to go and look at jab, or or learn more about copa music, or to learn about rara music and the history of that and what it signifies. um, but because of the pandemic and we have all of these restrictions, I mean, it's just to get I think in education institutions like yours, I'd love for to see things like maybe someone who makes John Canoe costumes come and talk about the history of John Canoe and kind of show you this costume signifies this. This person who has the bull horns, it signifies the greed of Europe. So when you see this man with the devil horns, it has this kind of significance. And I just feel like the more we know about these details and what they signify, it encourages us to participate in things more, especially things like Carnival. I always say to people, please do not spectate, participate. And I think, especially in the nature, when you're speaking about like Caribbean history, it's very, it's not as subtle. Our culture is not very subtle, okay? When you look at just not just Carnival, but just our music, our dancing and stuff like that, it really is something that is very experiential, it's very immersive, and it's not something that you can just read from a book. That's like the opposite of what we are. And I think it's about engaging in different and dynamic ways, not just through lectures or people like me talking, but um, but yeah, I think that just kind of engaging more with creative Caribbean and African American groups and having that kind of hands-on approach.
Yeah, I think more than ever, it is our time to create our narratives, right? No longer can our narratives be created for us, and it's just wonderful to have you here and be a part of this conversation. And I mean, it's been exciting just to wait for this day. So I'm just so happy that you're here, and I'm interested. I mean, how can we continue to support you? How can we continue to learn more about Know Your Caribbean? Like, what can we as a New York City comrade continue to do to help?
Oh, I mean, just in terms of spreading the word, if you see that I share something, share it with someone. And of course, I would love to be. It's an honor to be here, honestly. To be speaking with like an American-based institution and to find that interest in Caribbean history, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So I just wanted to say thank you guys, and I feel really honored to be here. In terms of support, it's just like sharing. If you see something that resonates with you, and just share it with other people. I think that's the importance. I think with Know Your Caribbean, it's not it's a history page, but it's not an academic page. So it's and the reason why I the way I format it is so it's palatable and it's something for everyone. So for example, I may juxtapose some like a clip of like some 90s dancehall with like some kind of text from the 1600s and link them together. And I feel that's how we can connect to ourselves. It's not I understand because I am not, I guess, maybe your typical academic. I like music, I like hype, and I think in order for Know Your Caribbean to grow is just to encourage people to see, yes, you can learn about history in a different way, in an engaging way, and something that something has something there for everyone, and just to show that, you know, bridging the gaps as well. You know, it's not. I think one of the beautiful things about Loyal Caribbean is not just Caribbean people say, "Oh, I'm Cuban. I didn't know you in Grenada had that too. We call it this, so you guys call it this, but it's the same thing." That's beautiful. But also to see African Americans say, "Oh yeah, we do that too. We call it this." I'm like, "Wow, really? On we're in South Carolina, we call it this." Or to find out that in the Carolinas they used to have John Canoe as well. That's a beautiful thing. And I think it's you know, helping to just for us to encourage each other to stop this divisions that we keep having, is to understand and love our differences, but you know that we all fundamentally come from the same place. So
Absolutely. We can't thank you enough, and we will have you back at some point.
yeah.
And it has been a pleasure, everyone who has joined. We thank you again. We continue to welcome you as our program continues throughout the month and beyond. We are not just here in February. So thank you again, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.